Today, I'm joined by Lewis Bantin of ECI Partners, a leading mid-market growth-focused PE house, and we supported their portfolio company CSL, who are a highly impressive IoT connectivity provider, recruit their current Chief Commercial Officer, Greville Co. So welcome, Lewis.
Great to be here, Ryan. Thanks very much for having me on the show. I'm Lewis, partner at ECI. I've been here for 16 years now. I've been a partner for 12 of those. I joined really to help set up part of our team, which supports the growth of the companies that we back. So as you mentioned, CSL, critical comms provider in the IoT space, one of the companies that I've helped us invest in and then working with. I was delighted to work with you on the appointment of Greville earlier this year in a CCO role, quite a key role in the development of the business. And I guess how we sort of came to work with you is really, we sort of recognized that there's specialists out there like Herringbone who are really good in the GCDM space, in the revenue space, and who are a bit different to some of the middle market search firms that we see, probably more at the non-exec in CFO level here in the UK. And in reality, sort of hunting for someone who's great at the CRO space is something that's a bit different and is often a bit of a global search, particularly in tech. So yeah, we're delighted to work with you on this appointment.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, the revenue leadership certainly is the focus. And I think we know every senior search is tricky. It does definitely help being a specialist in that area. So we're really pleased that Greville's doing well. I think he's been there 6 months now. So that's good to hear. So how did you get into what you do? What led you here? Was it fate or by design?
Yeah, I'd love to say it was all a grand plan that was worked out by my school when I was 10 years old. That would be embellishing the truth, to say the least. I was an engineer by training, so came through the sort of chemical engineering world. I was heavily influenced by my father in terms of that was a good place to play, good salary prospects, good career, probably slightly influenced by the fact that that's where he was. And I sort of pursued that route for quite some time. But then when I went to university, I got sort of seduced by the bright lights of the city and ended up sort of working in strategy consulting for 8 or 9 years, worked for Monitor Group, which is a Harvard Business School, a consulting business made famous by Michael Porter and the Five Forces framework. They had also, interestingly, when I joined back in 99, they had just set up their own captive private equity company. So they had joined forces with a New York-based firm to effectively earn their way by investing in companies, helping them grow and develop, realizing return through the capital value appreciation, which always sounded like quite an interesting way to do it. And given that Michael Porter thought it was a good idea, I thought there's probably something in there. And so I sort of wound my way through consulting into commercial diligence and working with companies to drive growth. And then 16 years ago, decided to sort of jump 2 feet into the industry and was lucky enough to find a home with ECI where they were looking to build on at that stage, sort of 30 odd years of experience, but how do they take it forward to the next level and compete in the next decade or multiple decades. So I came in on the sort of ground floor as we were looking to build out our value creation capability, which is something now that most funds in the industry will have in one way, shape or form. And I was lucky to have seen the experience with Monitor and Monitor Clipper and learned some of the lessons around what worked well, what could be a bit better, and then have deployed that in my career here at ECI.
Yeah, you're certainly one of the more experienced, and that's a compliment, folks, in value creation. So what's the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. When it's really challenging is if something goes wrong, right? You committed a lot of money, a lot of someone else's money, a lot of pensioners' money to a business. If you get that wrong, and it doesn't happen catastrophically or overnight, but there's a sort of gut feeling that develops that you suddenly you've got a problem and you fix it. Now, thankfully, we're surrounded by great colleagues and we, whilst we do make mistakes, are not very frequent and more often than not, we're getting things right, which is why we've been able to raise sort of 12 funds and sort of have a successful nearly 50 years of existence. So, that is definitely challenging. I think in the day-to-day, it's a super competitive industry for us to invest in the best businesses, which obviously have less chance of going wrong. It's an ultra competitive space. We have to be as sharp as the companies that we back in terms of competing to win. So we spend a lot of time on our own sales and sales effectiveness, making sure that we're as sharp as we need to be to get the best assets in the portfolio.
And also an award-winning business as well, I see. So that's always good to see.
Slightly sanguine about awards. Yeah, I think in this case, but in ECI 9 and 10, ECI 9 was a fund that I joined on, delivered sort of best in class performance. So we're sort of top performing fund in Europe for our size, usage in both 9 and 10. And all of those funds have had great winners, great teams. That we've had a few scars on our back as well, right? So None of them are perfect, but they've been pretty good.
I don't know if you can ever ask what's the single biggest lesson that you've learned in business in your career, but what are the biggest lessons that you've learned, I guess, in the context of your role, which I guess should be able to apply to most things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple that sort of come to mind. I mean, I think you come out of an engineering world, you come out of a strategy world, and you think it's all about solving the problem, right? And particularly with an engineering mindset, you believe things are kind of constructed and then they perform. What's interesting when you come into this world of private equity is it's the combination of that kind of engineering with entrepreneurialism. And some of the best stories I think and lessons that I've heard from, in my career have been from the entrepreneurs that kind of created amazing businesses without thinking about the engineering. So we were one of the first investors in this thing called the internet, which developed early in, late 90s, early 2000s. And we backed a business called laterooms.com, which I think today is probably still our single best ever return on an IRR basis. I had a 500% IRR over 2 or 3 years. It was just a phenomenal business. And that business, the clues in the name, it was late availability hotel rooms was the service. And over the course of the 2 or 3 years that we were invested in the business, we built out the engineering to actually sort of take, the front end leads that were coming to laterooms.com, connect those with the live inventory of hotels, whether it's in Manchester or Dubai or New York, for the next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. When do you need that? And obviously, as an engineer, I thought, oh, what a great insight to build that, right? The reality of it was, this was a business that came out of an advertising agency in Manchester that bought 3,000 random domain names in the late 90s to see how did natural search work. And one of the domain names they bought was laterooms.com. They realized that they could monetize that because they were getting natural traffic coming to it. And they could then sell those leads to hoteliers and generate a business. So we invested in the business. It was making £3 million of profit. We sold it 2 years later, making £10 million of profit, having done the engineering work. We also critically identified that it wasn't backpackers using the service. It was business people and their PAs, because, you probably don't know where you're going to be in the middle of next week, and neither do I. And so therefore that late availability insight is quite important. So I think the lesson there is that, it's sort of how do you harness the kind of the gut feel and the experimentation of an entrepreneur together with some of the engineering process that then can help scale a business. That's probably the big lesson I've learned since being at ECI. I think it's not just about solving a problem. It's also sort of how do you sort of capture a need initially, and that might be slightly serendipity. It may not have been planned, right? I doubt they selected laterooms.com in those 3,000 random names. So yeah, that's definitely been an interesting one.
So laterooms.com, when you bought the business, was probably more of an idea, less well executed than you thought. And you had to come in and then actually build on that and build on a great idea, but actually begin to build a product and execute.
Build a great idea that had traction. It was growing fantastically well, but was slightly bootstrapped, right? So they didn't have a live inventory on the website. They had a call center behind the scenes that was saying, hey, Mr. Marriott in Manchester, we've got Ryan needs a hotel tomorrow, can you help him out? What's the price you can give me? So it was brokered via the phone whenever we invested. When we sold, it was brokered live inventory on a sort of electronic exchange effectively.
Yes.
So, and that was part of the management team's plan. That was part of what they wanted to do. But we helped them facilitate that. We helped them get that done. We helped build insight into the customer base and the value of that customer base. And then we orchestrated a very successful sale to TUI at the time. Yeah, it's an interesting one where you're harnessing the idea, genesis of the idea. The entrepreneurs have been great at spotting the opportunity and beginning to monetize it.
Yes.
And then I think where we helped on the journey was helping to make that a bit more systematic, a bit more scalable, etc., and ultimately built a great business for TUI to take forward.
Interesting. Where do you draw inspiration? So some people go to coaches, mentors, others go to nature, exercise. Yeah, where is it that you turn to?
Yeah, at a personal level, it's probably not dissimilar from lots of people. I'm a big fan of sports, big Irish rugby fan, as you know. Glad we hold the bragging rights over our South African brethren at the moment, only just. And I think you see how a team works, and there's different roles, and not everybody scores the tries, but you need a kicker to score your goals. And I think there's so many lessons you can sort of learn in your life, let alone in business. I am also, a big fan of getting out into the mountains and stuff like that. If there's nothing to put your own, achievements and existence into perspective, then standing at the top of a hill, looking down how far you've walked, it's a good leveler. I think in all our careers, it's great to get the time to get out and do that, put the stresses and strains of life to one side. But yeah, I'd say that those two things probably pretty high on the list.
And I saw, interestingly, I think you had Jamie Roberts come in and talk. Yeah.
He came to talk about kind of teams that he's played in, British Lions and the Welsh team, on club level as well, and in France and UK. And I think what was interesting, he was at the same college as me at university after my time, thankfully, as I wouldn't have fancied captaining him. But it was interesting, the professionalism that he has developed, then when it meets the amateur game, he found that quite frustrating, actually. But it was the same, interesting enough, in France when he went to, Racing 92. It was totally different to the way the Welsh team were managed and the British teams as well, the Lions. And I think one of the things I took away from that conversation was actually the importance of people knowing their role, right? In a business, if your role is the CRO, you've got one particular role. If your role is the finance person, you're one particular role. If you're the tech person, it's one particular role. And you need all those roles to perform for the business to sing. And then the chief executive can probably play a little bit of the sort of, a tweak here and a tweak there. And, that's clearly true in rugby. You can't have everybody being the scrum half. Yeah, that's important in a business as well.
Yeah, as you say, I think you see it within businesses as well. If you're looking for a CRO, someone who's accountable for that number, that's exactly what they need to spend their time doing and make sure they are the very best version of themselves doing it. So, and sort of related, what advice could you give for building high-performing teams? And that could be based on your experience of the team at ECI, or it could also be the experience of what you've seen where businesses have built good teams and possibly other teams that have struggled.
Yeah, if I think about ECI at one level, I think it's partly the old adage of kind of sort of hire hard, manage easy, right? Get your recruitment process right. If you invest the time and effort into getting the right team on board, the right people on board your team, and then giving them their head, right? You find that, that by delegation, lots of things get done that you never thought you would get done, right? And obviously people bring different ideas and perspectives to that, which is great. So getting that sort of hiring decision right and then giving people their heads so they can contribute, develop themselves, I think is great. And I think does genuinely sort of build high performance. I think sometimes that can be uncomfortable as the leader or the front person for that, because you may not know exactly what's going to be said next, right? But I think there's a balance between micromanaging, and so you get confidence in someone's abilities, but then letting people have their head, and they'll often surprise you in terms of how well they perform. Best people probably take on that responsibility, they look to draw it, and then 9 times out of 10, if someone's got that attitude, they want to take it on, they're probably going to perform, because they're going to make sure that they don't leave any stone unturned. They're going to make sure that they deliver their best performance because they recognize that you've given them that kind of privilege, I guess, right? And I think in terms of teams within businesses, I think that clarity on role is important. Breaking down silos within an organization. We often talk about, the best investments we've made are pretty clearly correlated with the most engaged teams. I think that drives more discretionary effort. It drives more collaboration. It becomes self-reinforcing. They're competing to win. They're winning. They're doing more of it. They're learning again. And when it's difficult is when, there's a bump in the road. The best teams are the teams that are agile and grip it and react. And the toughest situations that I've been in, certainly my career at ECI, has been where, maybe a team is not willing to face the music, or they don't want to sort of fess up to the issues that are maybe at hand. And that becomes a challenge very, very quickly, because you're an equity risk taker. You're at the top of the capital stack. Trading performance issues sort of hit us much harder than they'll hit the debt side of the equation. What we need is a kind of open relationship. We don't profess to be perfect. There's no point banging fists on the table, but it's, if we've got a problem, then we need to solve it together.
Yeah, I mean, as you'd expect, I would say the hiring hard, it's not quite the rest takes care of itself, because you need to be supportive and onboard people correctly. But when you get to that point where, as you say, you just let them loose to do their thing, if you've recruited the right person and you've taken that time, as you say, it's often they can surprise you. Although I guess in more environments, if you're recruiting a heavy hitting CEO or CRO, you don't want any surprises, right? If you think about the best revenue leader you've worked with, what do you think made or makes them successful?
I think about the best sort of revenue leader I worked with in my time. I think it's around breaking down those silos between marketing, selling, success. I think there is definitely a benefit in having an integrated front end, the commercial engine. And whilst everybody, has KPIs, I think making sure as a revenue leader, you drill down those KPIs so they all sing together, right? And that's really important. I think the adoption of the revenue ops model, where you've got one version of the truth in terms of data, where you've got good pass through of information as you move through the pipeline into accounts. That's, I think, something that's become, I've started to see real value in that, as a marker of someone who's probably knows what they're doing and has seen it work really well. And then I think the other side of it is something that I often talk about when we're working with our sales and marketing and revenue leadership across our portfolio, is almost the sort of Pirelli advert, power is nothing without without control. What we look for really as an equity investor is, yes, we want high growth. We want businesses growing at 20% plus top line, but we also need control, right? The best businesses are the businesses that are sort of metronomic about beating their budget, plus or minus 5%, whatever it might be, because then that feeds obviously into finance, it feeds into budgeting, it feeds into ability to pay your mortgage, all that type of stuff. And I think,
Yes.
whilst surprises on the upside are great, often they can become a problem because then you put a resource behind them, etc. If I think back to wireless logic in our portfolio in ECI 9, Oliver Tucker and Phil Cole, who were the chief exec and revenue leader of that business, they just never missed a number. I mean, it was amazing. And this was a business growing at 25, 30%. They were in a great market. I mean, that's part of the battle, right? Good revenue leaders tend to work out when they're selling a good product, and when the product doesn't really fly, that's a sign of kind of, someone who sort of understands the market well, understands the potential. I think, what those guys did in terms of delivering top line growth and doing it with control so that it was clear to all the rest of the team, whether it's in tech and in ops, in finance, gives you so much confidence in terms of your planning, so much confidence as an investor. Keep going back to the Pirelli advert.
Yeah, and that's definitely, for obvious reasons, something we're seeing now in terms of a requirement. It's not just we want someone who can build teams that can win deals at all costs, right? It's about sustainable growth. Breaking down the silos and the control piece is, again, something that we saw. Actually, we'll talk to a CRO that we placed at a highly successful software business, and you talk about control. He showed Willett a timetable of the next quarter, broken up literally into morning and afternoon, of exactly what he was doing when. And his team would know this. So it was one-on-one meetings, meeting with marketing, and it was all a sort of weekly, 2-weekly cadence. And he was fully in control of exactly what was going on. That level of detail was impressive. So,
and it sort of leads to predictable sales, predictable revenue. And look, if you're in a software SaaS business, you've got the great advantage that, you're probably running with churn of sub 5% or whatever it might be. It's much tougher in a consulting business. It's much tougher. Yes. Industrial products business, but nonetheless, there, as you say, you can break the problem down. You can look at the activities, the inputs, track the outputs, and again, it comes back to kind of the honesty of like, for whatever reason we've got a softening in the market, we need to know. There's no point hiding the issue, because if we know about it, we can react. That is so critical in an equity world where even if you're in sort of growth equity or venture capital, you've still got huge risk if you miss your beat. So yeah, it's a critical point.
Sort of related, but when diagnosing or assessing a go-to-market function, we don't have to get too technical, but sort of what are the first things that you're kind of looking for? What are the first few questions that you're looking for the answers to?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's probably sort of there's a number of people who specialize in sort of that kind of assessment. Tools in our DD locker. We have an expert on our team, Chris Janelli, who's a bit of a guru on sort of GTM, and so he helps us. And I think that sort of experience of running a sort of a revenue team is pretty important. I think one of the things that stands out for me, and I was thinking of a business we met recently, who probably one of the best go-to-market models I've seen, was just their focus on process. They were a very heavily SDR-driven lead gen business. They had a nice tight product and a nice tight ICP, which wasn't rocket science to get to do. But then they'd invested in the tools and the technology to be able to build a market map, to relentlessly push that data and mine it to get to appointments. But they then sort of managed to work out how to get the closing process, the account execs in the right place, the right time, differentiated based on enterprise versus middle market, and get the sale. But then, the neat thing was they haven't forgotten about the customer at that point. It's one thing selling someone something, but customers got to get utility out of it. I think having success is really critical as well, particularly in a SaaS world where you need people to be using the product, getting utility, getting value. And that drives cross-sell, that drives pricing power, that drives renewals. You can't just sort of close them 3 months out from the contract period, right? I think that, again, role definition back to Jamie Roberts, it's like customer success, it's about usage, account execs, it's about closing, SDRs, it's about generating the lead. Having one system that goes all the way through that, one definition of a customer, one definition of a sale, obviously getting your incentive structures to sing together so they're all pulling in the same direction. That's where I've seen it really make a difference.
Yeah, I think the control and the process. And when you can see that, that they understand how and why they win because of accountability, the process. It's all laid out right, and everyone knows exactly what they need to do and how they should do it.
People have moved on from the days where sales was an art and it was all down to, I don't quite know what Ryan does, but he's amazing. It's got to be more systematic than that. And that way, as an investor, you can feel confident putting more money into the machine because you're going to get a 3-to-1 ratio or a 4-to-1 ratio, whatever it might be. In this case, it was a 7-to-1 ratio. It's pretty incredible.
Is there anything else that is a real challenge and a struggle, or something you have to you got to throw some manpower at to overcome?
Yeah, pricing is a good one. Lots of businesses have sort of had to rediscover how to exercise pricing power and how to communicate effectively with clients around that. I think retention is a big one. So driving usage and success with a view to improving retention, understanding where the leaks are in the bucket, understanding how to, change the top end of the funnel to improve the overall sort of performance on retention. And that's a critical one. I think the topics around revenue ops and how do you get more data, quality data from the commercial engine. Lots of salespeople don't particularly like filling in their CRM or whatever it might be. So how do you facilitate that such that they're spending their time selling, but you aren't losing the data that's in their heads? And then, I would say if I think about the businesses that I work with at the moment, it's also around new channels to lead gen. So whether it's SDR, digital channels, paid search, SEO, whether it's online TV, digital out of home, whether it's radio, whatever it might be, getting that marketing mix.
Yes.
And how do you test that effectively? When you find that over time, some channels will lose their efficacy. You have to find a new pond to fish in. The advertising industry is continually coming up with new innovations, influencer marketing, whatever it might be. And depending on your business, that, those channels may be more or less relevant. So that marketing mix, I think, is one that's definitely important for us.
Are there any trends in the tech space that excite you most? And I sort of smile because, everything's about AI, right? Anything tangible that you're seeing that you think is quite exciting currently?
I mean, there's absolutely loads going on in the tech space. The application of AI and machine learning is probably the bit that I think is interesting. My suspicion is it's going to be more around productivity gains than it is around new products and services, but I could be totally wrong on that. And I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Certainly in our portfolio, if you look at a business like Avantia, digital home insurance, they've been using machine learning for 5, 6, 7 years. They wouldn't be able to compete without it. And the science that goes into the way they price risk and compete for business within price comparison websites is, sort of off the charts in terms of technology. But it's interesting, you chat to Mark Easton, the chief executive, and he would then say, look, I don't need another data scientist, but I do need 3 or 4 data engineers because, we get 1,000 new quotes every day. That's the oil that drives our business. Every one of those quotes needs a bit of cleaning, needs a bit of manipulation, needs a bit of adjusting to make it useful. In large part, the algorithms and the models that are running are publicly available. There's little proprietary science to it. But the advantage that Avanti have is that they sit in that ecosystem. They suck out as much information as they can every day. And they're sitting on a data lake that's probably been building up for 15 years. And that asset is pretty unique. So then when you couple that with a team that can harness the power of that and a technology set that can respond quickly, that becomes really exciting. And in their industry, insurance, home insurance, not many people are doing that. It's giving them an edge. It's helping them to grow really strongly. And, that's super exciting. That's the application of the technology within what is quite a boring business. Everybody needs home insurance, but, they're doing a better job of getting you the best price and making sure that their insurance partners are making an acceptable return on investment. So that's the sort of thing I think would be quite neat.
It sounds like a business that's set up quite nicely for success, i.e. they're absolutely on the front foot of what's happening currently. They've been using machine learning for quite some time. It's an easier sort of first or next step into more advanced technologies. So, well, Lewis, thanks a lot for your time today. I really appreciate it. Very helpful to us that you participated in this sort of initiative, and appreciate all you've done for us. ECI has been good working with you, and it was obviously good to Gravel at CSL over the line recently. So thanks a lot.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for the help with Gravel and the guys at CSL.